There's a strange kind of poetry in the way K-pop Demon Hunters has rewritten the rules, not just of box office performance, but of how we understand audience behavior in the streaming age. This wasn't a film that clawed its way to relevance. It was already a phenomenon. It had already conquered Netflix, already became the second most watched original movie on the platform, trailing only behind Red Notice. It had already saturated fan communities, music charts, and social media. And yet, when it hit theaters months later, it didn't limp in as a novelty or a niche re-release. It led the box office. That's not just rare, it's unprecedented. And if that sounds familiar, it should, because this kind of cultural aftershock echoes something we've seen before. The Rocky Horror Picture Show. When Rocky Horror was first released in 1975, it bombed. Critics dismissed it, audiences ignored it, but then came the midnight screenings. The fans showed up, they dressed up, they sang the songs, they shouted the jeers, they threw rice and toast at the screen, and suddenly, a film that was never intended to be a midnight movie became the midnight movie. It became a ritual, a community event, a shared experience, and nearly 50 years later, those screenings still happen. That kind of longevity doesn't come from marketing, it comes from love. K-pop Demon Hunters in its sing-along edition is doing the same thing. Yes, it's available on Netflix, yes, you can watch it at home, but going to the theater, going to the sing-along, is something else entirely. It's participatory, it's communal, it's cosplay and choreography and catharsis. It's fans gathering not just to consume, but to celebrate. And that's why it worked. That's why it led the box office. Because it wasn't just a movie, it was an event. And that event wasn't built on brand recognition. It wasn't built on pre-existing IP. It was built from scratch. That's what makes this story so remarkable. Selling a new property with a stylized look and a genre-blending promise, K-pop idols fighting demons, is a tough pitch, especially when the animation style leans heavily into anime tropes. Variety was right to point out that this could have made the film harder to sell to general audiences. It's bold, kinetic, and unapologetically niche, but Sony has walked this line before. They took a similar risk with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse, both of which embraced a comic book visual language that felt radical at the time. Each universe had its own distinct animation style, and the result was a kaleidoscopic celebration of visual storytelling. But those films had Spider-Man. They had decades of cultural familiarity to lean on. K-pop Demon Hunters had none of that. It was wholly original. And yet, it worked. Because K-pop itself is a genre that thrives on fan engagement. It's not passive, it's participatory. Fans don't just listen, they create. They remix, they evangelize. That's how Psy's Gangnam Style became the most viewed video on YouTube and still is to this day. Not because it was marketed like a blockbuster, but because the internet took it and ran. That same energy is what propelled K-pop Demon Hunters from a streaming hit to a theatrical phenomenon. Netflix didn't need to manufacture hype, the fans did it for them. Word of mouth became the engine, and that's the one form of marketing you can't buy. Studios have tried, it doesn't work. You can flood the market with ads, but if the movie doesn't resonate, the audience will let you know. And when it does resonate, when it connects, you get something like this. We've seen this dynamic before. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was released to PVOD platforms just 2 weeks into its theatrical run. That should have been a death knell. Instead, it thrived. It grossed $186 million domestically and over $480 million worldwide. Why? Because the internet got involved. Pirates ripped high-quality copies, memed exploded, clips circulated, and suddenly, Puss in Boots had a grassroots campaign that no studio could have engineered. The digital leak didn't kill the movie, it amplified it. It gave it legs, it gave it personality, and most importantly, it gave it shareability. That's why we're seeing a shift in how we measure success. The Hollywood Reporter recently argued that the second weekend is now more important than the opening weekend, and they're not wrong. Opening weekend numbers are increasingly front-loaded. They reflect the fans who were going to show up no matter what, but the second weekend, that's when the broader audience weighs in. That's when word of mouth either sustains or sinks a film. Fantastic Four: First Steps dropped 67% in its second weekend. Sinners, starring Michael B. Jordan, dropped just 5%. That's unheard of. That's staying power. That's audience endorsement. K-Pop Demon Hunters didn't need an opening weekend to prove itself. It had already done the work on Netflix. The theatrical release was just a victory lap. And Sony, despite what some critics have said, didn't miss out by selling the film to Netflix. They made a smart deal in uncertain times. They couldn't have predicted this outcome. No one could. Because this was a black swan event. You only recognize those in hindsight. You don't see them coming. Okay? Could Disney have predicted the success of High School Musical when it premiered on the Disney Channel back in January of 2006? Of course not. It was a modest TV movie that became a generational touchstone. Analysts love to look back with the benefit of hindsight, but the people making these films don't have that luxury. They're working in the fog of the present. The Variety editorial also brings RRR, the Indian epic that made just $15 million in North America before exploding on Netflix. That's another example of how streaming can amplify a film's reach beyond borders and barriers. But then they compare it to Encanto, and that's where the analogy falters. Encanto was released in theaters in November 2021, but Disney announced it would hit Disney Plus on December 24th of that year. That killed any urgency. Why rush to theaters when you know it'll be streaming in a few weeks? That's not the same as RRR or K-Pop Demon Hunters, which built their momentum organically. K-Pop Demon Hunters succeeded because it was good, because people loved it, because they shared it, and when the theatrical release came, it wasn't about discovery, it was about celebration. It was about giving fans a communal experience, a chance to sing along, a chance to be part of something. And that's where the Rocky Horror parallel becomes more than just a footnote, it becomes a framework. Because what we're seeing now isn't just a one-off success. It's the birth of a new kind of midnight movie. One that wasn't designed to be niche, but became niche through passion, through participation, through ritual. So here's the question I want to throw to you. Do you think K-Pop Demon Hunters would have flopped if it went theatrical first? Is word of mouth more powerful than ever in the streaming age? And what other movies do you think could benefit from this reverse release strategy? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear from the collectors, the preservationists, the skeptics, and the fans. Let's make this a conversation worth having. Because here's the thing. This movie didn't just break records, it broke assumptions. It proved that theatrical success isn't about timing, it's about resonance. It's about how deeply a story connects with its audience. It's about how much people care. And when you strip away the marketing budgets, the release windows, the studio politics, what you're left with is the one thing that matters most. The audience. Their enthusiasm, their loyalty, their willingness to show up. K-Pop Demon Hunters is a case study in how fandom can transcend formats. It's a reminder that the most powerful force in entertainment isn't the algorithm, it's the human impulse to share something you love, to gather, to celebrate, to sing along. And in a landscape dominated by data and metrics, that kind of organic connection is priceless. This film didn't succeed because it followed the rules. It succeeded because it broke them. And in doing so, it carved out a new path, one where originality, specificity, and style aren't liabilities but strengths. One where the theatrical experience isn't just a launch pad, it's a reward. And maybe, just maybe, one where the midnight movie isn't a relic of the past, but a blueprint for the future. So until next time, keep watching, keep questioning, and never underestimate the power of a movie that knows how to connect. Because sometimes the biggest hits aren't the ones we predict, they're the ones we feel.